Julian Assange battles extradition to the United States. Is he a journalist doing his job or a criminal, as the US government contends? And what does it mean for freedom of the press and whistleblowers? Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. Julian Assange's legal team appealed to the British High Court to block his extradition to the United States. Assange is wanted by the US on charges that include spying after WikiLeaks released confidential US military records and diplomatic cables. Julian Assange's website, WikiLeaks, came to international attention in 2010 when it published a series of almost 500,000 documents, mainly relating to the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Authorities say Assange broke the law and endangered lives.
We have an active, ongoing criminal investigation with regard to this matter.
The United States launched a criminal investigation, and Sweden also issued an international arrest warrant over allegations of sexual misconduct. In 2012, Assange lost a battle against extradition to Sweden, and after skipping bail, the 51-year-old took refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. During the 2016 US presidential campaign, just months before the November election, WikiLeaks published confidential emails from the Democratic Party showing that Hillary Clinton was being favored by the National Committee over her rival Bernie Sanders. The CIA concluded that Russian intelligence hacked the Democratic Party servers and provided the data to WikiLeaks. Russia has rejected the hacking allegations, and Assange says there is no proof. Sweden dropped its case against Assange, but in 2019, Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno said that Assange had violated the terms of asylum and allowed the British police to arrest him based on a US extradition warrant. Assange is wanted by US authorities on 18 counts, including spying and federal conspiracy charges.
Julian Assange!
His defenders around the world say he was doing journalism, exposing the wrongdoings of governments.
It's really up to the Biden administration and Secretary Blinken. It's up to them to really walk the walk when it comes to press freedom. They like to make statements about it, but this is one clear action that they could take. Dropping this prosecution of a journalist and publisher is a clear action they could take that would show the rest of the world how serious they are about their statements on press freedom.
Now, to discuss the role of Assange in all of this and what could happen to whistleblowers, we have a whistleblower himself in our panel. John Kiriakou is a former CIA analyst. He joins us from Arlington in Virginia. Also with us, Joe Lauria is editor-in-chief of Consortium News. He is in Alexandria in Virginia. Here in Washington, D.C., Max Blumenthal is editor at thegrayzone.com. And Joseph Williams, who's also here in D.C., is a former U.S. News and World Report senior editor. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. John Kiriakou, you will be very familiar with this case. In fact, you went through a very similar experience. You worked for the CIA, you were a whistleblower, you exposed their torture program, and you were sent to prison for that. You were locked up. When you look at the Assange case, there are those in the United States government who say that what Assange did endangered the lives of people. They point to sources and methods being compromised. And of course, there are others who say that what Assange did was what journalists do. He exposed malfeasance, crimes committed by a government. How do you see the Assange case?
Oh, I don't think that Julian Assange revealed any sources and methods. I think that Julian's crime was embarrassing the powers that be in Washington. You know, one of the red herrings that the federal government uses in every one of these cases is they say that sources and methods were revealed and that the lives of either American diplomats or our war fighters serving overseas were placed in danger. They did say that with Julian, but could never offer any proof, just like they couldn't offer proof with Ed Snowden or with Chelsea Manning. So I don't believe that there was any damage to the national security. I don't think that we should take seriously American accusations that there was damage to the national security. And to respond to your second point, I think that there isn't any question at all that Julian Assange is a journalist. Even if you don't believe that he's a journalist, you have to acknowledge that he's a publisher, and he should have the same rights that any journalist or publisher has.
One other point, John, and you've been through this process, the legal process. Do whistleblowers in the United States have any kinds of legal protection?
No, actually. We have a whistleblower protection law in the United States. It's relatively recent, just in the last decade, but national security whistleblowers are exempt from its protections. And so we don't allow an affirmative defense in the United States. You can't get up in court and explain to the judge or the jury why you did what you did. In my case, there was actually a precedent set where the judge said, Mr. Kiriakou, you either did it or you didn't do it. It's irrelevant why you did it. And so I had no choice, which meant that every national security whistleblower that followed me had no choice.
Max Blumenthal, is Julian Assange effectively a political prisoner, or is he, as we've heard over and over again, a criminal, a man who stole documents?
Well, if you believe that Julian Assange would still potentially be a free man or might even enjoy some more vocal support from the U.S. government or from the corporate U.S. media, which dominates U.S. airwaves, because he had not embarrassed the Democratic Party by publishing factual emails showing corruption within the party to destroy the candidacy of Bernie Sanders or the corruption surrounding John Podesta and so on, if he hadn't been blamed by Hillary Clinton for her defeat to one of the most beatable candidates in recent history, then he's certainly a prisoner of U.S. partisan politics, but he also appears to be a prisoner of the U.S. national security state. That's almost clear. That's clearly established by the fact that the case, the espionage case against him, has fallen apart in broad daylight. We've seen Siggy Thordarson, the lead Justice Department witness against Assange, exposed as a child sex predator who is seeking to negotiate a way out of his own prosecution by lying about Julian Assange, instructing Chelsea Manning to steal documents. We have seen again and again the case fall apart, where over 30 former CIA officers have come forward to confirm my reporting that the CIA had plotted to assassinate Julian Assange under the watch of Mike Pompeo, which would have been a political assassination of someone who, as John Kiriakou pointed out, was not only a publisher, but a journalist with a 100% record of accuracy. So in my opinion, he absolutely is a political prisoner. And the U.S. press could easily make a drumbeat for his, for freeing him, but it chooses not to.
But Max, this goes beyond merely embarrassing U.S. officials, because if we look at what Julian Assange revealed and told us, these were very serious crimes, people being killed, massacred, murdered. Has anyone ever been held accountable for those crimes?
Yeah, well, Julian Assange has shown that a German citizen was kidnapped by a CIA snatch team and tortured and sodomized in a CIA black site in a case of mistaken identity, and then was just let go. If it weren't for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, we wouldn't even know about this case. There are so many cases like it. You also have Cablegate, where we saw the State Department engaging in illegal activity in sovereign countries to topple their governments, training opposition figures that we saw through the Stratfor cables exposed on WikiLeaks, training opposition figures like Juan Guaido and his mentor Leopoldo Lopez to overthrow the Venezuelan government, plotting to sabotage dams inside Venezuela to help overthrow Hugo Chavez. The list goes on and on and on. These are details few journalists even know, and that's why I think they're after Assange and are seeking to kill him in slow motion by prolonging his imprisonment for as long as possible.
Joe Lauria, this is what Assange's lawyer said after the British government, the right-wing British government, which is a strong ally of the United States, decided that he will be extradited to the United States. Let's listen to his lawyer.
This decision is a grave threat to freedom of speech, not just for Julian, but for every journalist and editor and media worker in this country. He faces 175 years in prison for publishing information for which he's won journalism awards the world over and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
So just, Joe, listening to that there, I mean, what kind of message does that send, not to just journalists in the United States, but around the world, when the United States can get someone like Julian Assange extradited, and, you know, especially journalists who cover, investigative journalists who cover things like national security issues?
I was at that press conference with Jen Robinson in London, and the overall message here is that the British and American governments are willing to risk, if not damage or destroy, their continuous protestations that they're for a free press and democracy, and that it is the other governments, authoritarian governments, that are the ones throwing journalists in jail. It is very clear that this is not the case, that the United States is acting like any tin pot dictator in this case. And why? Because Julian Assange is too big to free in this case. He is too important to them. They will destroy their own reputations if the mainstream media reports this thing accurately, and they've pretty much buried the story, which gives them continuous cover, which is part of what Julian Assange has done in his whole career, is to report the stories that mainstream media won't cover up for the establishment that they serve. So all journalists, yes, indeed, will be endangered if this goes through, because he has acted as a journalist, whether you say he's a journalist or not as immaterial. He has acted, he's conducted journalistic activities. He did not steal any documents. And go back to Vice President Joe Biden in December 2010 on Meet the Press. He was asked if they could indict Julian Assange, and he said, unless we can prove he stole some documents and they were not just given to him as a journalist, placed in his lap, then we can't get him. But what happened? Nothing has happened. As Max pointed out, Siggi Thordarson in Iceland has recanted his testimony that there was any hacking activity by Julian Assange whatsoever. The whole hacking case rests on that now recanted testimony. We've got a situation where Julian just worked with his source, Chelsea Manning. He asked for more information. This is absolutely routine journalistic activity, and the U.S. government knows it, but they can't let him get away with this because he exposed too much. He was too dangerous to them. They need to make an example. They want revenge, punishment in a sadistic way against him, looking at the way he's being treated in prison, for example. This is a clear case where the U.S. and Britain can no longer stand up and say that they're for a free press and democracy.
Joseph Williams, this is not an isolated case. We have had cases like this in the United States before. I mean, the one that comes to mind is the Pentagon Papers case, in which the New York Times exposed the lies of the United States government. There was the My Lai massacre, which was in Vietnam, that took place in March of 1968. None of those journalists were imprisoned. Why is this case so different?
I believe the case is different in that Assange, I mean, I would push back a little bit on your guess in calling him a journalist or a publisher. I mean, certainly he published things on the web, and he was certainly exposing government secrets, but he's occupying kind of a gray area, in my view, as a traditional journalist, between the leaker and the man who is got technological savvy like nobody's business to be able to get into and infiltrate government computers and then expose those secrets to the world. And I think what his case rests more on the fact that he embarrassed the government, and also on the fact that he kind of wore out his welcome in hiding in the Peruvian embassy in London. Were it not for that, I think he'd still be there. I think he'd still be a free man. And I think the United States and Great Britain will still be kind of frustrated in trying to bring him to account for what they say are very serious crimes. You also have to discount the fact, you also have to include the fact that his case is a lot more nuanced than we might believe from what we're hearing tonight, in that not only did he allegedly break into government computers, which in and of itself, to expose secrets, I think is a very noble cause, but it's still it's still pretty much against the law. But you also have this law in the United States that's been used as a cudgel against anybody who speaks out against the government, against anybody who criticizes the government at a time of war, and they find reason to prosecute them. So there's a lot of things going on in this case that make it extraordinary, and that make it something less than Assange standing up against a powerful government, which he in fact did. But there are other things we haven't even talked about him throwing in to a degree with with the Russians. We haven't really talked about the fact that it wasn't Hillary Clinton's recommendation on which he was prosecuted. It was Donald Trump who prosecuted him or wanted to prosecute him. And because he exposed the fact that Donald Trump was in league, at least seemed to be in league with the Russians, and Trump couldn't stand that, so he moved to prosecute Assange. So I think there are a lot of nuances in this case that make it a lot less black and white, but still the outcome is still the same, that it is going to have a bit of a chilling effect on some journalists around the world, but we've been here before.
Joe Lauria, what do you make of what Joseph Williams just told us?
Well, I mean, in terms of being a traditional journalist, I worked 6 years for the Wall Street Journal, 6 years for the Boston Globe, 10 years for the Sunday Times of London. I know what a journalist is, and he's acting as a journalist working with sources. We have to also remember, you're right, the Trump administration is the one that indicted. Biden said that they had to prove that he stole the documents, and they never indicted him, the Biden administration, because they knew that that would also include the New York Times and everyone else that published the exact same documents that he's being prosecuted for. He's not being prosecuted for the 2016 DNC leaks or for Vault 7, but I believe those are the political pressures on Joe Biden now not to drop this case from the Democratic Party establishment and from the CIA, because if not to get Assange on the DNC leaks and the Vault 7, which was the greatest release of CIA materials ever, that would, in their view, let him get away with it. But he's not been indicted for that. He's indicted for the 2010 documents that the Obama administration refused to indict him on, and that the Trump administration did, the same exact evidence. So I think it's really important to understand he's a journalist, and all journalists are endangered if he's extradited here to Alexandria and stands trial in the courtroom here.
Right. John Kiriakou, if Assange is extradited to the United States, and I say if because his legal team has appealed that decision by the British court, do you believe he'll face a free and fair trial here, or is the outcome of that trial a foregone conclusion?
Oh, absolutely not. He's been charged in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is known colloquially as the espionage court. It's the home of the CIA. It's the home of the Pentagon. It's the home of innumerable intelligence community contractors. It's also called the espionage court because no national security defendant has ever won a case there. I was prosecuted there. The CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling was prosecuted there. Ed Snowden is charged in the Eastern District of Virginia. Now Julian Assange. This is as tough a venue as any in the United States, tougher than any in the United States. Just as an aside, I hired a jury consultant when I was facing trial, and he got access to 15,000 pages of classified documents in my case. He reviewed everything, and then he told my lawyers, if we were in any other district in America, I would say, let's go to trial, we'll win this thing. But the Eastern District of Virginia, he said, your jury will be made up of people who work for or who have relatives who work for the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, national security contractors. He said, you don't have a prayer in the Eastern District of Virginia, and Julian Assange wouldn't have a prayer either.
Max Blumenthal, of course, we've seen all these reports that Julian Assange was spied upon by United States intelligence agents while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, and you pointed out a moment ago that there was a plan to assassinate him at one point. Given all that, how safe would Julian Assange be if he sets foot, or when he sets foot, on United States soil?
There's absolutely no chance for Julian Assange to get a fair and free trial in the United States, especially, as John pointed out, in the Eastern District Court, where there's an almost 100% conviction rating. And I just want to offer a correction to the guest, Joseph Williams, who was attempting to provide nuance and didn't appear to even know which embassy Julian Assange was in London. It was the Ecuadorian and not Peruvian embassy.
And I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Thank you very much.
The more salient point is that he did not wear out his welcome at that embassy. We've interviewed Guillaume Long, the former Ecuadorian foreign minister at the Gray Zone, as well as embassy staff, on how close and fraternal their relations were with Julian Assange. What actually took place was a CIA contractor, UC Global, subverted the national security of Ecuador, took over the cameras, began hacking into the devices of all guests, including your colleagues in the media, including the Washington Post top national security correspondent, Ellen Nakashima, when they visited Assange. And all along, we're plotting to assassinate Assange under orders of Mike Pompeo, who declared WikiLeaks a hostile, non-state foreign intelligence agency to give him the authority to neutralize a publisher and journalist. So if we're going to provide nuance, we should at least be accurate about what actually took place at the Ecuadorian embassy. This was a complete violation of the diplomatic sovereignty of Ecuador at the time when a US-backed president was chasing an IMF loan. We saw global relations completely upended in the hunt for one man, and now we're seeing journalists having their own bank accounts frozen and seized by Five Eyes states, most recently Graham Phillips in the UK and Alina Lip of Germany for reporting the other side of the story in eastern Ukraine, where ethnic Russians are actually under the Ukrainian guns. These citizens of Germany and the UK are being prosecuted and sanctioned by their own governments for doing journalism.
Okay, Joseph, do you want to
respond to that? And the US press is silent.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that. First of all, thank you very much for correcting me. I misspoke. I did mean Ecuador, but I said Peru. Second, I think my point still remains the same. I mean, and I, as an African American, in the United States, I have a lot of suspicions about the government. I know that what the government is capable of. I know what the government has done in similar cases, and there's a through line here from the Espionage Act through COINTELPRO through the assassinations of the Black Panthers, through the jailing of several people who were freedom riders. And I get it. I understand that. But it seems to me that I still am struggling to understand why the government would go through such trouble to assassinate Assange when Snowden is sitting right out there, when Reality Winner was jailed. I don't understand what makes Assange
cannot come back to his own country. Sorry, Snowden is not sitting right out there.
No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that he is. I meant that if the CIA wanted to assassinate any of these people, it seems to me they could have done so at any point in time. And I'm going to understand why
Snowden. That would start a war.
Why they've
they cannot go and assassinate Snowden in Russia.
Let Assange go to trial. I don't get that. And especially in the Eastern District, where there's 100% conviction rate. I mean, Assange is worried that he's going to go to Gitmo. And I don't think that's, I get the government is capable of some things, but I'm not sure that they would want to do that. I mean, I don't understand why one of the most famous political prisoners in the world, if anybody harmed a hair on his head, the United States would be held to account. And that's one of the things that I'm struggling to come to grips with.
Okay.
I'm keeping an open mind about what you've said, but I don't think that it raises logic to my ears.
Okay, I'm going to get to Joe Lauria. Joe Lauria, when you look at this case, I'm wondering what kind of precedent it sets around the world, really, because, I mean, what happens if a country like, say, Saudi Arabia says, look, we don't like that particular journalist to publish bad information about what we are doing in Saudi Arabia. We'd like you to extradite him to us.
Well, they will look at the beacon of freedom and democracy of the United States and see that the U.S. has done it, so of course we can get away with it now. It sets an unbelievably bad precedent. That shows, again, how much they need to get Assange. And what's the difference between Snowden and Assange that we've just heard? Because Snowden is done. He doesn't have access to NSA materials anymore. He really doesn't pose future danger to the United States government. Assange does. If he goes back to publishing, if WikiLeaks becomes what it once was, he's the conduit for others, for whistleblowers to give to him. He's a publisher, not a whistleblower. So they can't have, they want to destroy WikiLeaks. They're also going after people around WikiLeaks. Everyone around him feels somewhat endangered. This is why they have to get Assange, because he is a publisher, because he could tell the public what the U.S. government, what U.S. corporations, what the establishment in the U.S. does in secret. And they want to be able to continue doing that in secret. So they're going to try to stop and jail and destroy anyone who has the means and has already in the past done it and can in the future do it.
John Kiriakou, the United States has myriad intelligence agencies. I think at last count there was something like 17 intelligence agencies. There's a Directorate of National Intelligence. What kind of oversight is there over these agencies, political oversight?
That's a great question. There's very little oversight. There's, of course, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But you have an intelligence community with tens of thousands of employees, approaching 100,000 employees, and you have 24 3 dozen at most people on Capitol Hill who are supposed to be overseeing all of these agencies and organizations and covert operations. But more importantly than that is the fact that really the oversight committees have been, in recent years at least, since September 11th, little more than cheerleaders for the intelligence services. You know, time used to be, especially in the mid to late 1970s, when the committees would say, no, you can't do that. That's against the law. And now we've got the committees approving, you know, a torture program, a rendition program, an archipelago of secret prisons around the world, assassination teams, kidnapping operations. For all intents and purposes, there is no oversight.
Joseph Williams, what do you make of that? I mean, as John Kiriakou points out, there was a time when these committees in Congress did their jobs. There was a time when journalists were able to do their jobs as well. But that seems to have changed in the last 10 or perhaps 15 years. I mean, we look at the presidency of Barack Obama. I mean, he prosecuted many, many whistleblowers and journalists using the Espionage Act. In fact, he prosecuted more of them than all previous presidents combined.
I would say three numbers rather, 9/11. That changed the ballgame in my opinion. I also believe that the Espionage Act reflects another disturbing problem that we have in the United States, and that's prosecutorial overreach and the power that prosecutors have that's unchecked at a local level and certainly has a lot of muscle at the federal level. So I believe that Barack Obama did not want to have a 9/11 on his watch. Therefore, he felt like he wanted to do whatever he could to keep that from happening, even if it meant killing innocents, even if it meant prosecuting whistleblowers, even if he knew that his political career rested on being tough on terrorism. He made no apologies for that. I personally think that that was wrong. I think it was overreach, but I kind of understand where he was coming from. However, prosecutorial overreach has been a thing for generations, and it's been a thing here in the United States, and it only now is starting to reach internationally when we have this global war on terrorism that was fronted by the Bush administration and continued through 3 more.
Okay. And that's where we are going to have to leave it. Time's caught up with us. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.